About 2 weeks ago, I released a video with the title that Trump only has one path to save America. And in that video, I called for President Trump to release the FISA documents and the FBI documents and other currently classified documents in order to expose the deep state traitors. And last week, President Trump actually issued an order calling for these documents to be declassified. And that's very encouraging because he has taken a very important step to saving this constitutional republic. Now, in this video, I'm going to lay out what's next because we're going to talk about military tribunals, military police arrests of deep state traitors, and the potential lockdown of the United States under a declared national emergency. And I'll also explain why these are steps that must happen, that we should all support happening in order to save this republic from deep state traitors who are right now carrying out or attempting to carry out a political coup, an illegal, seditious coup to overthrow this country and nullify the outcome of a democratic election. And they have been caught. It is now admitted out in the open that there is an anti-Trump deep state conspiracy. You know, this has become obvious now for a number of reasons. I'm going to mention some of the documents here. We've got Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Senator Schumer, Adam Schiff, and Mark Warner having signed a letter now admitting that they are traitors to America, and they are calling on the FBI and the Department of Justice to defy the United States president in order to cover the deep state's criminal activity and keep it hidden from public scrutiny. So we are calling for the arrest of those individuals and literally thousands of others that I'll get into here in a minute. I just want to mention too, by the way, I have no idea if President Trump watches these counterthink videos or if his advisors do. There were many people calling for Trump to release those documents, so I'm certainly in no way claiming that I'm the most prominent voice calling for that. There were, Sean Hannity was calling for it. Rush Limbaugh was calling for it. Alex Jones was calling for it. Among all those individuals, I'm one of the much smaller voices in this realm. But I think people appreciate my analysis because it's been very much right on this entire time and also ahead of the curve. And what I'm going to bring you here right now in this video I think it will blow your mind. I think it will open up your understanding of what's about to happen, and also why you should support this lockdown of the country, which some might call martial law. And we need to support the president in this temporary lockdown of the country so that he can clean out the deep state, issue mass arrests for literally thousands of people, and restore the constitutional republic and restore this country to the American people. And so in this analysis, I'm going to just lay out how this can work. Very quickly, though, I'm Mike Adams. I publish hundreds of different websites. Just want to encourage you to visit trump.news, which covers, of course, President Trump and all this. I also have real.video, which may be where you're watching this. And real.video is the YouTube alternative. And we now have over 30,000 videos posted there from thousands of different channels. And it's growing every day. And it's currently serving over 4 million video minutes per week. So be sure to check out real.video for other people's views and analysis of this situation. You're going to find a lot of very, very well-informed and intelligent voices there as well. So to understand what's coming, there's so many pieces of this moving puzzle. Let me just start with present-day news. Brett Kavanaugh. So Kavanaugh is about to be nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. This last-ditch desperate effort by the Democrats to fabricate this complete hoax accusation against him by this woman, Christine Hazy Blasey, who can't remember in what drunken stupor she had interactions with which boys in high school and can't remember dates or times or anything, just now accuses Brett Kavanaugh. She's worked with this abortion pill pharmaceutical company where she's served as their biostatistician for several years, and she's co-authored science papers for this company called Corcept. And Corcept offers the RU-486 chemical. It's an abortion pill chemical, and some of the revenues depend on abortions remaining legal in the United States. So not only does this accuser against Kavanaugh have a financial conflict of interest that is being completely covered up by the entire media, but she also has zero credibility. She has no evidence, no accurate memory, and she's an anti-Trump activist. By the way, she's been part of the marches. She's donated money to the Democrats. Her attorney was a fundraiser for Hillary Clinton, and so on and so forth. This is a last-ditch desperate effort, but you might wonder, why are they going to such desperate means in order to try to stop Kavanaugh? Here's why. Once Kavanaugh is confirmed and takes his seat on the U.S. Supreme Court, he adds one more vote in favor of these very aggressive executive actions that Trump is about to unleash on the deep state. And Kavanaugh needs to be present on the court in order to support Trump's emergency actions, which will be challenged, of course, by crazed, deranged Democrats in the Senate, many of whom are going to be arrested and tried for treason, by the way, as well as other individuals such as Rod Rosenstein, who is the acting, I think he's the deputy attorney general under Jeff Sessions, who might be a brain-dead zombie at this point. We're not sure if he's even conscious. We have no idea. He's not present in this world. Is not doing anything. So Rod Rosenstein is running the Department of Justice, and he is using it as a weapon to try to carry out a political coup. Rod Rosenstein is one of many deep state traitors who will be arrested and tried with treason or sedition or some similar crimes, and may spend the rest of his life in prison. But and by the way, there are thousands of these people. But how do we get there from where we are now? Well, it turns out that President Trump is, they say he plays 4D chess, right? He's already many moves ahead of the deep state. And all of this has been planned for such a long period of time. And it may even be, there's a theory that Jeff Sessions has been deliberately stepping back and allowing all these people to essentially to take the bait and engage in these deep state activities while Sessions gathers evidence against them. I don't believe in that theory. I think Sessions is just AWOL. But some people have that theory. I thought it's worth mentioning. It doesn't matter. Sessions will soon be irrelevant to this because he will be fired very, very soon. But Trump is so far ahead of the deep state in this. And you're gonna prove this to yourself here in just a second as I read you something. I want you to go to the whitehouse.gov website. Well, actually, the Federal Register. This is a government website, and I want you to look up Executive Order. What number is this? 13818 as of December 20th, 2017. This is an executive order that was signed by President Trump. And this executive order, as you will soon see, lays the groundwork for the criminal arrest and prosecution of Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and other deep state traitors, including James Comey and Loretta Lynch and many others, and Andy McCabe, even John Brennan, and so on. You might say, "Well, I never heard about that," and that's why you're watching my videos, because we bring you things that you have never heard of in the media, but things that are true that you can verify for yourself. So again, go to the executive order website on the government's website, 13818, signed on December 20th of 2017. The title of this executive order signed by President Trump is, quote, "Blocking the property of persons involved in serious human rights abuse or corruption." Now, you hear that title, you might say, well, what does that have to do with arresting Hillary Clinton? You have to remember that titles of these documents are irrelevant. It's just like the Senate can pass a new law, and they can call it Saving the Beautiful Children Act. And the Saving the Beautiful Children Act could be a new law that spies on all American citizens using the NSA, looking at all your cell phone traffic or something. In other words, the title has nothing, it doesn't have to have anything to do with what the law actually says. Titles are marketing labels, and they carry zero weight. In other words, titles of executive orders and titles of laws have no legal standing whatsoever. The title here is a deliberate, it's a fake by President Trump. It's a fake out to get people to think that it's really about one thing, but actually it's about something totally different. It's actually about arresting deep state traitors. And the way you know this is that if you go into this executive order and you read it, here's what you're going to find. He says, first of all, he declares a national emergency. And this national emergency has been in place since December 20th of 2017. And here it is. Here's the paragraph. This is President Trump. I therefore determine that serious human rights abuses and corruption around the world, again, the word corruption is key here, constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security, foreign policy, and autonomy of the United States. And I hereby declare a national emergency to deal with that threat. Boom! Trump just declared a national emergency. And that was, of course, over a year ago, almost like a year and a half ago. No, I'm sorry, about almost a year ago, December 20th of 2017. So coming up on a year ago. All right, you say, so Trump has declared a national emergency. Why does that matter? A couple more reasons. Stay with me on this. If you continue to read this executive order, it specifically talks about government corruption and the misuse of government resources to aid enemies of the United States. And that those are the people who are going to be essentially arrested and prosecuted and held under military tribunals, which I'll talk about in a second, due to this executive order. Specifically, Hillary Clinton, what did she do? She arranged for the sale of uranium to Russia-linked corporations. It's the Uranium One conspiracy, but it's a true conspiracy, where she and James Comey and Robert Mueller and others, even former U.S. Senator Harry Reid and Barack Obama, they all conspired to sell a strategic supply, a resource that's used in nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, uranium, to sell that out from underneath the United States and put it in the hands of foreign enemies of America, specifically Russia, and then Russia shipped the material to Iran. And then Iran was the recipient of tens of billions of dollars of internationally laundered illegal money that President Barack Obama arranged to have flown into Iran and offloaded on cargo planes, military cargo planes. And Obama, in order to do this, he bypassed all international banking regulations. He committed massive international crimes in order to carry this out. He engaged in massive money laundering. He committed numerous crimes, dozens of different crimes. And he did this in order to betray the United States by aiding and abetting foreign enemies of America, i.e. granting funding to Iran, as well as technical assistance, as well as uranium fuel, so that Iran could build nuclear weapons, ballistic delivery systems in order to threaten America's allies in the Middle East, namely Israel, with nuclear weapons, but also threaten so that Iran could threaten the United States itself. At the same time, by the way, a lot of people don't know this, Barack Obama arranged for Iran to capture a U.S. drone, and the press ran a complete cover story on that. They claimed that Iran was able to do GPS spoofing to hack the drone and make it land on a runway in Iran. That's complete nonsense. First of all, the GPS signals are highly encrypted using, I think, 512-bit encryption. And in order to spoof those signals, you'd have to have something sitting even between the satellite and the high-altitude drone. You'd have to have a super high-altitude airplane of some kind, which Iran doesn't even have, and you'd have to have the ability to break 512-bit military encryption in real time. It may even be 1024-bit encryption. And Iran doesn't have that kind of decryption breaking technology either. Obama arranged for that drone to be flown into Iran and landed there in order to give America's enemies this technology. And he also did the exact same thing with a Navy vessel that he had. I forgot the name of this specific vessel, but remember when those U.S. sailors were captured because a Navy vessel went into Iranian waters, and then John Kerry got involved and embarrassed the U.S. and bowed down to the enemies? this was all arranged under Barack Obama. So with that in mind, keep in mind, Hillary Clinton has arranged for America's enemies to have uranium fuel from America, and Barack Obama engaged in international money laundering and fraud and the illegal transfer of America's military technology to America's enemies overseas. With that in mind, let's read the rest of this executive order that Trump signed on March 20th of 2017. And it says in one section here that this executive order applies to, quote, to people who are a current or former government official or a person acting for or on behalf of such an official who is responsible for or complicit in or who has directly or indirectly engaged in, number one, corruption, including the misappropriation of state assets. Ring a bell? The expropriation of private assets for personal gain, comma, corruption related to government contracts or the extraction of material resources or bribery. Whoa. Well, does that remind you of anybody? Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton, in her case, she accepted hundreds of millions of dollars in international bribes to her Clinton Foundation, which was a massive money laundering vessel. It was a shell front. They claimed it was a nonprofit. It was actually a money laundering system where she could accept bribes from international, even enemies of America or international industrialists or other people who had a lot of money overseas, including Russians and so on. And the excuse that was given was that, they were paying her to give a speech. So she would go somewhere and give a speech for 20 minutes, a speech that nobody wants to hear. She's the most boring speaker ever in politics, it seems. And then they would pay her, $50 million. Well, the $50 million isn't for the speech. The $50 million is a bribe, which is mentioned in here, bribery, a bribe for the future influence of a person they thought was going to be the president, President Hillary Clinton. And that as president, she would continue to betray the United States and continue to sell out the U.S. uranium supply and continue to sell out U.S. military secrets and continue Obama's agenda of systematically destroying the culture, destroying the U.S. economy, opening the borders to a floodgate of illegals, and causing race war conflict in the United States by heating up racial tensions instead of accomplishing racial healing, which was what people thought he was going to do when he was elected president. A lot of people voted for Obama in the hope that if we had a black president, that would finally prove that there could be racial unity in America and that America wasn't a racist nation. What they got instead was a president who stoked the flames of racial tension while aiding and abetting America's enemies. And this executive order signed by President Trump almost a year ago specifically targets the actions of Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and their co-conspirators, which include, by the way, Loretta Lynch, Eric Holder, perhaps, but definitely Andrew McCabe, John Brennan, Peter Strzok, James Comey, and literally thousands of other people throughout the deep state apparatus who I believe must now be arrested. And again, this executive order establishes the power of a national emergency. Now, just as a little background for those of you who may not be familiar with how this works, we have three branches of government in the United States. We have the executive branch, which carries out the orders. That's President Trump. And the FBI is subordinate to President Trump. The FBI is not mentioned in the Constitution. It's not a separate branch of government. It is part of the executive branch. And every person inside the FBI must follow the orders of the president, no matter who that president happens to be. The same is true with the DOJ. In fact, the same is true with the FDA and all the other regulators. They are all subordinate to the executive branch of the federal government. And President Trump is not only the chief executive officer of this United States of America, he's also the commander-in-chief of the military forces. And this is very crucial to remember because we're going to come back to the military and how President Trump can and must invoke a military action against these traitors and why he can do that. Because when there is an act of war against America as a nation, it is the proper and constitutionally protected role of the military to arrest, traitors who are acting to destroy America as in an act of war. So you might say, well, what about posse comitatus, where you cannot deploy military troops in the United States? Trump doesn't need to do that. All he needs to do is invoke the war powers that reside in the executive branch of government and have military police arrest these deep state traitors and subject them to military tribunals. And it turns out that President Trump has already laid the groundwork through a couple of different executive orders, the one I just mentioned to you, and one more I'm going to read here, that establishes the ability of military police to arrest civilians who are non-military individuals who have committed treason against the United States of America and subject them to the military court system, where you don't have the corrupt deep state judges that the left has managed to put in place throughout many, many federal district courts, such as the Ninth Circus, we call it a district court, Ninth Circuit, but we call it the circus. So with that said, let me get back to the three branches of government. So you have the executive branch, and then of course you have the judicial branch, which is the court system, and then you have the legislative branch, which is Congress, split into two houses, the Senate and the House. So these three branches of government are supposed to be, quote, co-equal, and they're supposed to be a check and a balance system on each other so that no one system concentrates power and becomes a dictatorial type of regime with permanent dominant power over society. Because in societies where you have too much power concentrated in the hands of one institution, that institution, if that concentration is allowed to continue for a long enough period of time, that institution becomes extremely corrupt, as we've seen in practically every radical left-wing system on the planet, whether it's North Korea, communist China, modern-day Venezuela, even Brazil right now for that matter, although there's some hope with some new candidates in Brazil. And even many European nations have gone this way throughout history, most notably the Third Reich and the rise of Adolf Hitler, who concentrated power in the hands of himself and his party loyalists. And of course, you know what happened then. But under times of national emergency, the checks and balances system of the United States government is temporarily recalibrated to put power in the hands of the executive. The executive branch, i.e. President Trump and those agencies that answer directly to him, which includes the FBI and the DOJ, as I mentioned, they have extraordinary powers, if invoked, powers to override legislative branch, even the judicial branch, because it is a time of national emergency. And the reason for this and the precedent for this is that throughout U.S. history, when national emergencies have been declared, it was widely believed, and this includes the belief of the framers, that there wasn't time to debate every little thing. That if there was a national emergency, there had to be a commander-in-chief who was granted the temporary power to declare a national emergency and to act on that emergency by issuing directives and orders that must be dutifully followed by his subordinates throughout not only the executive branch, but even the other branches of government. So in times of national emergency, a president can override the court system. And this has happened many, many times throughout U.S. history, including in World War II. And just, I mean, I don't have to defend that statement. If you don't know that, just go study some history. It's repeatedly throughout U.S. history that is the case. And this is part of the structure of our Constitution and our system of power. Well, Trump has declared a national emergency. He did it almost a year ago, which means that we are operating under a national emergency system. And on top of that, President Bush declared a state of war in September of 2001. That state of war has never been rescinded or resolved. And that, of course, was put in place shortly after the attacks on September 11, which brought into law the Patriot Act that, what a coincidence, was already written and ready to go and just waiting for the right event to roll that out so that the government could spy on the American people. And it was the Patriot Act that ultimately put more power in the hands of the FISA court. Even though the FISA court existed before that, it was granted a lot more power to spy on Americans under the guise of spying on only foreign nationals and only terrorists, Well, it was Barack Obama and Loretta Lynch and Peter Strzok and James Comey that used those powers granted under the Patriot Act that came out of the 9/11 terrorist attacks to spy on President Trump and attempt to defeat him so that he could not win office, and then to overthrow him through a very carefully planned deep state political coup. All of these activities relied on the secret spying apparatus that was brought into life, really, in September of 2001 under President Bush. And it's no surprise, by the way, President Bush is, of course, or former President Bush, is a deep state operative, former head. Well, I'm sorry, his father was a former head of the CIA, but it's from a CIA family. And these people are all deep state rhinos. They are warmongers. They are not, pro-America people in the way that President Trump is a pro-liberty, pro-constitution, let's make America great again kind of guy. I think the Bushes were not like that. They were like, make the Bushes powerful again. They weren't really about America. They were about the Bushes. They were about the secret society. They were about the deep state. And that's how they used their power back then to create these deep state powers that have been abused and exploited and weaponized against the American people ever since. I don't mean to get too carried away with that. It's just a little bit of a back explanation so you understand the context of what's happening here and sort of how it all came to be. And by the way, President Trump knows what happened on 9/11. Yeah, he can't say it publicly because so many people have been taught the false narrative, the official government story, which is complete and utter nonsense that violates the laws of physics. But Trump knows the real story. You just won't hear him ever talk about it. Just know that he knows about it. In fact, he used to talk about 9/11 because, remember, he's a New Yorker. And he followed this very closely after the attacks in 2001. So he knows what's up. And he knows, he knew the firefighters and the rescue workers and the police officers and the construction people and the architects and all those people who really know what happened in 9/11. And Trump knows that Building 7 was, of course, pulled deliberately. We'll use that term pulled just to avoid freaking people out. Okay. I hope you know that there were 3 buildings that fell that day, and there were only 2 that were hit by airplanes. If you don't know that, then you don't know basic facts about American history. But the media tries to pretend there wasn't a 3rd building that day. It was called World Trade Center 7. And by the way, if you want to know the truth about that, go to Real.video. Real.video has become a repository of research videos on 9/11 and other pivotal events in American history, including like mass shootings in Oklahoma City and Sandy Hook and all these other things. Is quite astonishing. But getting back to what's happening next. So I've established that President Trump has already signed into active order the state of national emergency. And I've described how the concentration of power in the executive branch happens in a state of national emergency. Now, the average American just walking around today has no idea that we are, number one, under a state of war, and number 2, under a declared national emergency. They have no clue. So they do not understand that the president right now has absolute power to essentially mandate or order every branch of government to do his bidding. And so we come to this recent action on behalf of President Trump, or at his hands, involving Nancy Pelosi, and we're going to talk about that for a second. Trump orders the FBI, the DOJ, to release unredacted documents that will expose the deep state traitors inside the FBI and the DOJ. And he did this last week. He ordered the release of all the texts involving, I think, Peter Strzok and James Comey and Lisa Page surrounding the Russia investigation, which was a massive hoax carried out to try to frame Trump administration officials and try to overthrow the United States of America by carrying out a political coup that has failed, by the way. He ordered the release of the FBI 302 files, which is the FBI's interview notes. The FBI actually, they still take notes when they interview people, and those are called 302s. Well, the 302s were selectively edited by Peter Strzok and probably James Comey and others in order to try to alter history and try to cover up their crimes. And every time that documents have been released by the FBI or the DOJ in the last 2 years or so, or year and a half, they have redacted huge portions of them. And it turns out that those redactions were put in place not to protect state secrets, but to protect the complicity and the criminality and the traitorous actions of the FBI and the DOJ themselves, and specifically to hide the criminal actions of people like Peter Strzok and Rod Rosenstein, however you want to pronounce his name. So these redactions have been used to cover up these crimes and to try to obscure the real history of what happened. And by the way, you need to go out and read The Russia Hoax by Greg Jarrett. And that book, which I've listened to, I listened to the audiobook version of that, it is extraordinary. Big kudos to Greg Jarrett and even to Sean Hannity for promoting Greg Jarrett's book. It is the single most important piece of investigative journalism in book form that this country has seen in many years. In terms of articles about all of this, Sarah Carter is currently the #1 journalist, in my opinion, who's researching this and uncovering astonishing facts. And I think her website is just sarahcarter.com, but I'm not sure about that. Check that out. Anyway, she's a frequent guest on Sean Hannity as well. But Trump ordered these documents to be released without redactions. The FBI and the DOJ are now slow walking that request. And what happened, and what this document is all about, is that shortly after Trump's demand or order from the Chief Executive Officer of the United States of America and the Commander-in-Chief, he ordered the release of those documents. The people in the FBI have no reason not to follow those orders unless they are deep state traitors who are actively working against the interests of the United States of America, which falls under the executive order I just mentioned. Remember, corruption of a current or former government official, the misappropriation of assets, of state assets, the expropriation of private assets, corruption related to government contracts, or the extraction of natural resources, i.e. uranium or gold or money, the way Obama laundered all of that and put it in the hands of Iran. But now Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mark Warner, and Adam Schiff, all of whom are probably going to end up in prison, by the way, as they are traitors. They are actively seeking to undermine the United States of America. They all wrote a letter demanding that the FBI and the DOJ defy President Trump's executive command to release those documents. This is an act of treason. And even Judge Jeanine Pirro from Fox News has described this as an attempted coup and described it, I believe, as acts of treason or sedition or something similar. This is treason. Remember, we are in a state of war, and we have been since 2001. We're also under a state of national emergency. When individuals like this, who are pretending to be representatives of the United States Senate, engage in malicious actions to undermine the Commander-in-Chief of the United States during a time of declared war, which we're under, then they are engaged in treason against the United States of America by the very definition of treason. And treason is something that can get you arrested, not simply by the FBI or a police officer or a sheriff's deputy, but arrested by military police, MPs. MPs fall under the jurisdiction of the Pentagon. The Pentagon falls under the absolute jurisdiction of the President of the United States. And if you go back to the budget of 2017 that Trump signed on to when he promised, I'll never have a budget this big again because it's too much debt spending. Do you remember what was in that budget? I think it was $750 billion or so. For who? The Pentagon. Trump has made sure that the Pentagon is the one fully funded entity of the United States of America. And it's a brilliant move. And I support that move, by the way, and not for the reasons you might suspect. I'm not an international warmonger. I'm not all about occupying, 100 different countries or whatever the case may be. But we live in a very dangerous time. China is becoming a very serious threat. They're building aircraft carrier factories, by the way. They're going to be able to churn out high-tech aircraft carriers and high-tech hypersonic missile systems, cruise missiles, high-tech fighter jets and stealth fighters. They're doing that now. If the U.S. military is not very well funded, we will be invaded and overrun at some point. But that's a separate debate. We can talk about that later. Just say, God bless the nuclear submarine commanders at this point, because it is that threat of the total destruction of China and even perhaps Russia to some extent that gives the United States a degree of safety. And by the way, China is even working on orbital technology that can detect submarines at depth, across the world's oceans, that would make it so that China could find every U.S. submarine. And so much of the war is now moving into orbit, where if those satellites by China are allowed to exist, and if they function correctly, they would be able to destroy the nuclear submarines that the U.S. military has, which would take away the nuclear deterrent that currently grants the United States of America a very strong degree of safety, because essentially we have a gun pointed to their head, and they don't know where those guns are. They're, crawling around the ocean floors in the submarines, or swimming through the waters. So China is working on satellites to detect those submarines, while the United States is working on some orbital technology, and I believe already has some in place, that can destroy Chinese satellites and also destroy ground targets in China. And I'm not going to go into it, but just as a side note, I mean, this is all out there in the open, by the way. This isn't some crazy theory. It's mainstream news, actually, that China has been working on that. I think that's been in the Jane's Defense reports. We've covered it in the last couple of years on newstarget.com. But there's another thing, that China's working on ground-based laser systems that can destroy satellites in orbit. And so China, its first strike capability against the United States could include, and probably does include, both the very rapid destruction of U.S. satellites and also the complete destruction of U.S. nuclear submarines, combined with the activation of terror cells that are already positioned throughout the United States. So when it comes to funding the Pentagon, I certainly understand the need for the Pentagon to have enormous amounts of money at this time in our world, where there are so many threats against the United States. But part of the point of funding the Pentagon to that tune, which is a lot of money, obviously, especially when we have so much national debt at this point, part of the reason, I believe, is that Trump needs the Pentagon's loyalty. Trump needs the Pentagon in a friendly relationship, because Trump plans to call on the Pentagon to deploy military police to make mass arrests of deep state traitors, and also then to hold military tribunals for those individuals, which I'm going to explain here in even more detail right now. Let's go to Executive Order 13825 of March 1st, 2018. Okay, so this is March 1st of 2018. And this order is called 2018 Amendments to the Manual for Courts Martial, United States. And this executive order is very convoluted. It's very hard to understand what it's saying. But ultimately, if you really get into the language and you refer to all the external documents that it is referring to, it's one of those executive orders is referring to Section B, 27 of document, 4089.23 from the military code or whatever. It's got a bunch of that stuff in it. But ultimately what it comes down to is preserving or updating the courts martial procedures so that it preserves the ability of the military to prosecute non-military individuals if they are engaged in acts of war against the United States, which falls under military jurisdiction. You almost have to be a lawyer to understand this executive order. I'm not a lawyer, but the hints are strong enough that I can see the point of this when combined with the other executive order that I mentioned earlier, which declares the state of emergency. And then this martial law executive order establishes the ability of military tribunals to arrest and try non-military individuals, i.e. Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Peter Strzok, John Brennan, all these others, to try them for their acts of treason against the United States carried out during a state of war under a national emergency. And by the way, we've been under a national emergency for much longer than just since last year, because Obama declared a national emergency, I think in 2012 as well. And if you go back to that executive order, which I don't have a copy of in front of me here, it's very interesting that Obama declared a national emergency in anticipation of another Democrat taking the White House. And in that declaration, which we also covered at naturalnews.com, by the way, at that time, Obama's executive order grants the president the absolute power to control all communications assets in the country, which means the president, whoever that happens to be, and they thought it was going to be Hillary Clinton, the president can take over and control the internet, all media outlets, every social media website, Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, and every TV station, everything. So you put that together with what Trump has signed and what is about to be unleashed when these classified documents are finally made public, it is going to be a political shitstorm of such magnitude that you have never seen before, that this country has never seen before since the Civil War. In effect, what I believe is likely to happen, and also what I believe should happen, is the following. President Trump must have Brett Kavanaugh confirmed for the U.S. Supreme Court. He must be active on the court before this plan is unleashed. Once he's active on the court, Trump has that extra buffer space of additional support, because the Supreme Court is probably the only body at that point that can have any kind of a counter to the executive commands of the commander-in-chief operating under a national emergency and a time of war. Once that happens, Trump will perhaps initially call for the mass firing of individuals inside the FBI and the DOJ who are blocking his release of these classified documents. Once the documents, and he will fire however many people it takes to get to somebody who will release the documents. Once the documents are released, what happens is there's this mass reaction across the independent media. The left-wing media will try to cover it up because it's going to expose massive treason and treasonous complicity on the part of the left-wing media itself. There will be journalists who will be arrested. I mean, so-called journalists. You can't even really call them journalists anymore. They're left-wing activists and traitors. But they think of themselves as journalists, and they work for organizations like the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN. And some of those people are going to be arrested, as they should. Because they're not even journalists. They are seditious traitors who are trying to carry out a political coup, and they are complicit in the deep state's effort to try to carry out this coup. And they have deliberately, they know that the Russia hoax is fake. They know that it's all a hoax, but they're going along with it anyway because they are traitors, and they're carrying out acts of treason in a time of war, in a time of national emergency, treason against the United States of America. Trump will have them sooner or later arrested, potentially by military police, and held for trial under military tribunals, which has been, again, confirmed by this more recent executive order. So once the documents come out, there will be a massive, massive reaction, and you will see members of the independent media and the conservative media then calling for mass arrests of individuals. And it is this widespread calling for mass arrests that will trickle into the Senate, and it will trickle into the House, and it will trickle into the public consciousness. And it is from that enhanced public consciousness that Trump will be able to order the arrest, the military arrest, and the military trials of these individuals. And there are thousands of them who have committed treason against the United States of America, because once the records come out, it is just like clockwork. The public will be astonished. This is beyond anything like Pulitzer Prize winning news. This is bombshell of all bombshells. This is the mother of all bombshells, the Moab bombshell, you might say. This is the biggest political scandal in the history of our nation. This is the greatest abuse of power, or the most malicious abuse of power in the history of our nation. And by the time it's all said and done, people like Barack Obama will have either fled the country, which I think is the most likely outcome, or he will be arrested and imprisoned. And people like Peter Strzok will probably be arrested and imprisoned. And people like Andrew McCabe will be arrested and imprisoned. And during this time, this is important to understand, and I'm not going to apologize today for the length of this, because this is obviously very compelling information that you need to know. During this time, the minute that these documents come out, and you start to hear public calls for the mass arrests of these treasonous, seditious actors, deep state operatives, the left is going to go insane. The left is going to essentially attempt to invoke mass national chaos. This is, I think, Rule 5 of Rules for Radicals. I think it's Alinsky, right? Is to cause mass chaos. And they will call for bombings, they will call for arson, they will call for mass shootings. There are left-wing groups such as Antifa and Red Guards and Knights of something, I forgot all the names, who will be handed orders by the Democrat Socialists of America, probably, or other communist-leaning deep state officials and ex-officials such as John Brennan, who is a communist. And that's why Trump yanked his security clearance, by the way. But these radical left-wing groups will be handed these marching orders, and they will be told, here, you go bomb this building, you go murder that Supreme Court justice, you go try to kill Alex Jones, you go, set this city on fire, whatever. I mean, it's going to be insane. Because at that point, they know it's over for them if they can't cause mass chaos. In other words, if due process and law and order are allowed to march forward at the normal civil pace, then all of these left-wing traitors, their entire system collapses, their coup collapses, they go to jail, and the Democrat Party and the deep state are both discredited for a generation. I mean, this is 1,000 times bigger than Watergate ever was. And the New York Times will be completely discredited. CNN may collapse. They may have to shut it down. Nancy Pelosi may end up in prison, and Adam Schiff, I have no doubt that he will end up behind bars. So during this time, President Trump, I believe, will appeal to the people, the patriots of America. And this is really a very important piece of this. I'm actually appealing to President Trump to appeal to the people, because the people can help. There may be a time of such incredible chaos when we are in practically a civil war, where Trump is engaging in the mass arrests of these deep state operatives, where Trump has even declared martial law, or something similar to martial law that maybe is effectively martial law, where deep state operatives are hiding out. Maybe Obama flees the country. Maybe Adam Schiff is in hiding in a bunker somewhere, like Hitler's bunker. I don't know. Where some of these left-wing journalists, who are really not journalists, but they're deep state operatives, where they flee and they try to disappear. Where all these things are happening. And the claim will be that Trump has become Hitler. Oh my God, he's become Hitler. He has declared martial law. He has become a dictator, and the resistance must fight him. That's going to be the narrative. It's practically that narrative right now. But during this time, we, the people, must recognize that no, Trump is not trying to become a dictator. Trump is trying to stop the dictatorship that is globalism and deep state control. Trump is trying to give us back our country. And in order to do that, he is going to have to go through a period of a lockdown, of a military lockdown. And he will need our support to help maintain some semblance of law and order and civility across our cities and societies while the military arrests take place and the deep state actors and traitors are rooted out, arrested, tried, and either put behind bars or executed, or whatever they decide to do. I guess just depends on the evidence against these people. During this time, we, the people, must use our Second Amendment rights to defend our lives and to defend our nation and to defend and support our local law enforcement officers. We must help local police. We must help local sheriff's departments, and we must help maintain civility. And it's going to take a lot of millions of patriots in order to help do this, while President Trump is getting things done in Washington with the goal of eventually ending the lockdown, restoring things to normalcy, and allowing our elections to continue with an honest democratic system. And by the way, During all of this, Trump must issue a directive of a national voter ID. No longer can illegal aliens be allowed to vote in U.S. elections. They are stealing this country with illegal votes. And so a national voter ID directive must be put in place and must be enforced. And this has to be nationwide. And at the same time, the mayors of sanctuary cities who are protecting illegals, who are committing murders and rapes and other violent crimes, those mayors must be arrested and prosecuted for their complicity in aiding and abetting criminal felons. And even, I think, people like Jerry Brown, governor of California, who has declared California to be a sanctuary state, he must be arrested and tried for his crimes of aiding and abetting criminal felons who are murdering California citizens and getting away with it because of the sanctuary status of that state. So it's not just the deep state traitors in Washington, D.C. and Virginia and so on. It's also the traitors who run cities, the mayors of cities, even the governor of California in this case. It is so-called journalists who are actually deep state traitors, who are complicit. They are conspiring with deep state actors like Peter Strzok in order to deceive the American people by abusing and exploiting their power of editorial influence to lie to the American people and ultimately overthrow the constitutional republic that is the United States of America. So the arrests have to take place across the board. We, the people, have to support President Trump during this time. We've got to give him the time and the power to carry out this deep cleaning, this swamp draining activity, which could take a year. I don't know how long it's going to take. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, the executives of Google, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter must also be arrested and tried for their crimes against humanity, their conspiracy and racketeering crimes to overthrow the United States of America through massive election fraud and massive coordinated deplatforming of all conservative voices in order to steal the elections. So Google is guilty. Google has committed massive fraud, massive human rights abuses, and they've committed crimes against the United States of America, and so have the other tech giants. So if you're looking at all the arrests that have to take place to save America and give us back freedom and liberty and a true democracy where only American citizens vote and where your votes matter and where elections matter, and you don't have a deep state entity trying to overthrow every election whose outcome they disagree with, then you've got to you have to pursue these mass arrests of all of these deep state operatives and tech giant felons and so-called journalists who are really deep state activists, as well as sanctuary city mayors and so on. It has to be complete draining of the swamp. And the swamp is nationwide. The swamp is everywhere. And even Project Veritas has recently released videos. You know, kudos to James O'Keefe there, just an extraordinary individual, a true American hero, if you ask me, has shown that even these bureaucrats and government workers inside the DOJ and inside the State Department and other entities, they are all resisting Trump from inside and stealing government resources and using LexisNexis to run license plate searches on their targeted political enemies and engaging in the most outrageous crimes from inside the government. Those people need to be rooted out and arrested. And in order to achieve that, Trump is going to have to be given extraordinary power for a temporary period of time. Again, maybe 1 year. I don't know how long it will take to get this done. Personally, I am more than willing to grant Trump a lockdown status for 1 year to see this republic restored to its intended constitutional, liberty-oriented structure where the American people are back in charge again, instead of the deep state and the illegal aliens and the corrupt anti-American governors like Jerry Brown. We have to take back America, and it's not going to be pretty, folks. It's going to require a lockdown. It's going to require mass arrests, and we're going to have to defend our country against the incredible violence of the left, their attempted mass murders, their attempted executions, their attempted violence in the streets. They want bloodshed at that point, you see. They want mass chaos. Every successful communist revolution in world history has been carried out in a time of mass chaos and mass bloodshed carried out by the left. That's what they want. So they will try to use this time to sweep through the country. They will go door to door and try to murder conservatives. They will have hit lists of prominent conservatives to murder. They will have Sean Hannity's home address. They'll have Rush Limbaugh's home address. I'm sure somebody already has that. And they will send out hit teams to try to murder these individuals. And so it is, and Supreme Court justices and so on, only the conservative ones, of course. Of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg will be spared because she's the hero of the left, even though she's suffering from chemo brain and has lost most neurological function at this point. But that's another story. Kind of like Nancy Pelosi. You ever notice the Democrats are being led by like neurological zombies at this point, and their followers are also kind of cult-like zombies. It's like Night of the Living Dead in the Senate at this point. It's really, you people, you think that you deserve to run this country? It's incredible. So that's the analysis. I don't know if I depicted enough details here, but you're going to be called on, if you're a patriot, you're going to be called on to help defend this nation. And in doing that, I urge you to do a couple of things. Number one, as a civilian, as an armed civilian, your job is not to go out and shoot people. Your job is to maintain peace, to support law enforcement, to support local police, sheriffs, and even National Guard troops, and also government contractors who I've been told are going to be deployed in 20-plus cities across America. And I've covered that in previous podcasts if you're curious about that. Your job is to maintain peace, but also maintain strength for America. So if you're out there, don't go vigilante. That's what these left-wing Antifa people do. They're out there just trying to mass murder everybody. Our job as civilians is to defend this constitutional republic, defend our cities and neighborhoods and communities, and do not initiate violence, but definitely stop violence if the left is committing it. So if someone is walking up to your house with a Molotov cocktail and they're going to throw the Molotov cocktail and burn your house down, do you have the right to shoot them? Well, of course you do. If they are walking down your neighborhood and dragging people out of their homes and shooting them in the head like communists love to do you have the right to shoot them? Absolutely you do. This is not about initiating violence. It's about defending our republic, which we have a right to do. It is described in the Second Amendment. It's there for a reason. This is exactly what it's about. And of course, you've got oath keepers out there. And I interviewed Stuart Rhodes a couple weeks ago, and I asked him about this scenario, and he was very sure that the, 30,000 plus Oath Keepers members nationwide are ready and willing to defend their nation. And we should support Oath Keepers in that effort. So support lawfulness, support law enforcement that is pro-America, but defend yourself, defend your country, and you do have a constitutional right to engage in that defense in a defensive stance. So don't initiate violence, but absolutely defend your country. That's what this is all about. And defend your president and defend his right to initiate these emergency powers and to, frankly, to put our country through this, which is a necessary process to clean out the swamp, clean out the deep state, engage in these mass arrests, clean out the evil and the corruption and the traitors in the system, and then give us back our republic. And then at that point, restore elections, of course, because I think elections would be temporarily suspended during all of this. And frankly, I think these upcoming midterm elections have already been stolen by the tech companies with their selective censorship. So the midterm elections should be postponed at this point because Google has committed massive treason, massive election fraud. They've banned all the conservative voices off all the major platforms, including Facebook. So they've already stolen this election. And the media has been pushing all these absolute lies and disinformation, false information to try to steal the election. They're going all out. And this election is already stolen. But hey, maybe the American people get that and they're going to show up in droves and vote out the Democrats, which is frankly what needs to happen to support Trump in this deep state swamp cleaning effort. But I don't know. I mean, the elections probably aren't going to be delayed unless something huge happens before then. But under the lockdown that President Trump must eventually invoke, probably elections would be postponed until after that lockdown ends. So there you have it. Now, these are not, just to wrap this up, this isn't a prediction that everything is going to roll out in the way that I've said here. This is an analysis of a path that President Trump can take, but he may be stopped from taking this. For all we know, there may be a successful assassination of President Trump, which would set off a whole different fork path of probably civil war and the patriots rising up and taking back their country in other ways. I don't know. But if they successfully were to execute Trump, then obviously that would change all of this. Or if there were some other unforeseen factor that, I mean, I don't know. The Democrats have a full playbook of all kinds of scams and hoaxes and false accusations that they can run. If they could block Judge Kavanaugh, then that also throws a monkey wrench into this whole plan. If they, I don't know, maybe they can get Jeff Sessions to do something for the Democrats against America. That would be a game changer in favor of the Democrats. There's a lot of wild cards in this, or sometimes what are called black swan type of events, including a market crash type of event. There's or an act of war from China, an invasion or something. I don't know, maybe a military attack in the ocean, like a Navy altercation of some kind. Anyway, there are a lot of wild cards, a lot of black swan type of events. So this is not a prediction. It's simply laying out a sequence of events that really needs to take place. This would be the positive outcome if all of this took place and we, the people, end up getting our country back. And we end up with honest elections after all of this, where illegals are barred from voting nationwide, where we protect our borders, where we have the Pentagon with soldiers on the border, but not in the United States. We don't want military personnel in the cities. We don't want a military police state, but we do want a military presence on the border because that's the proper role of the military. And we don't want any president to have unlimited power forever. We want to end the national emergency. We want to end the state of war that was declared in 2001, right? So we want to restore the republic, but in order to get there, we're going to have to go through some very difficult times and some very astonishing deep cleaning, deep swamp cleaning. We're going to have to like dump Clorox into the swamp and have like super scrub brushes in there. Just clean out the whole swamp, all the tentacles and everything. Clean it out of every agency. Fire 50% of the EPA. Fire 50% of the State Department. I mean, just go in and clean out. And just get rid of them all. Arrest the ones who are the real criminals, a few thousand people, let's say, and fire the rest and start over with an honest form of representative government. You got to get rid of these traitorous senators. You got to get rid of these, and by that I mean have them fired or arrested if they're traitors. I don't mean, I don't mean like killing them or anything, but you got to get rid of people like Schiff and Pelosi and Schumer and others. I mean, these people are deep state traitors. I would have said the same thing about John McCain, but he already passed away, so that is no longer an active issue. Finally, let me just end it with this. I know sometimes people ask me after I do these videos, they're like, where are you getting this intel? Because you've been right so many times about what's happening. How did you know Trump was going to call for the declassification of these documents? How did you know there's going to be these, these contractors deployed? How did you know that even like the cryptocurrency was going to crash this year? How did you know all this stuff? Like, who's feeding you this stuff? Well, the truth is I'm just an independent journalist. I talk to people. I ask questions. I happen to know a lot of people. I know like U.S. Army intelligence people. I know former Marines, former FBI, active duty, military, law enforcement. But it's not like there's any super secret thing. It's just I know a lot of people, and I just ask people common sense questions, and then I do the research, and I go on to the website, the government Federal Register, and I look at these executive orders, and I follow other authors too. There are other authors who have written about this. I regret I don't recall their names at the moment. Not famous people, but I've seen some other independent blogs on these topics, and I've read those and looked at their analysis as well. And I sort of just compile all of this information from a point of view of being a patriot of being a Trump supporter, of supporting the Constitution, supporting the Second Amendment, obviously, supporting the First Amendment, freedom of speech, also with a strong background in technology and analytical science, as well as being an award-winning journalist myself and a book author and a science paper publisher and many other things that I've done, and a publisher of hundreds of websites and so on. So it's not a super secret, there's no secret formula for it. It's just, I'm just giving you my best assessment. It might be wrong. There's no 100% accurate assessment. It's just my assessment of where I think things are going and what needs to happen. And it all comes down to the fact that I care about this country. I care about America. I'm passionate about this country. I used to live in Ecuador and I've lived in Taiwan. And so, I've lived internationally and I speak multiple languages, of course. And everywhere I've gone is not even close to America in terms of the freedoms that we have, the quality of life that we have, the culture that we have. Texas is an amazing place. And the Texas people, which I consider myself a Texan now, but of course, real Texans don't consider me a Texan yet because my family hasn't lived here for 99 years. But real Texans are incredibly good people. And I find this true across the country, that real people in middle America, so-called flyover America, are just the most amazing individuals, people that I feel proud to share a country with, to share a society with those people. And I meet all kinds of people in Texas, cattle ranchers and, workers and plumbers and electricians and building designers and engineers and construction workers and long-haul truck drivers and heavy equipment machinery operators and all kinds of things. And I meet these people and I talk with them. And I'm humbled by them. I'm humbled by how much good we have in this country. People are good in real America. And then you go look at Washington, D.C. and Virginia and those arrogant elitists who think that they are better than everyone else. The Nancy Pelosi's of the country, the Jerry Browns. It's on both coasts. They think that they are better than you, that they are smarter than you. They think that they should have the power to rule over you. And they think that your vote doesn't even count. So that if you vote someone into office that they don't like, they're going to plot to remove that person, even if it means committing treason, even if it means destroying the country. There's so much malicious activity today by the political elite and the journalist elite. They would love to destroy America right now if they could just blame President Trump. They would love to see pain and suffering and a market collapse and even an invasion. As long as they could blame Trump, just to eliminate Trump, they would sacrifice this country. I have no doubt about that. And that is unacceptable. This is a country worth saving. This is a country worth defending. This is a country, frankly, worth, if necessary, giving our lives for. Because let's face it, our forefathers gave their lives for this country. I think about the greatest generation, as they're called, World War II, storming the beaches of Normandy. I think about the Revolutionary War and the framers and the original authors who signed their name to the Declaration of Independence, knowing that they could have been arrested and hanged to death by the British government. And yet they had the courage to do it because they knew that this was a concept, a freedom worth fighting for and, if necessary, dying for. Because liberty is so precious and America is so precious. It is such a unique nation in the history of human civilization. Nothing has ever come close to America in terms of the prosperity, the vision for individual liberty, the specific protections of individual liberties outlined in the Bill of Rights, the very idea that all power granted to government comes from the people initially, not the other way around. Whereas most of humans who have ever lived in the history of our world have lived under tyranny and authoritarianism. And they've lived under systems of government that said that we, the government, we are the originators of all power, and then we specifically grant you, the people, these very limited rights. That's the way most people have lived throughout human history. And that is the opposite of what America is. America is we the people. And government is granted very limited, very specific powers that are approved by the people and empowered by the people. And the government must be of the people, by the people, for the people. You know how it goes. So America is worth defending. Now, I believe that the American empire, its days are numbered because of financial problems and too much debt spending and so on. So this nation won't last forever, but it's still got a lot of good years left in it, and it's worth defending right now, even if just to prevent it from going the way of communism. You see all these left-wing people who think they're resisting Trump. What they're actually doing is they're creating, if they were to win, they're creating their own hell. They would create a hellish authoritarian society that would, before long, turn on them. You know, the people who work at Google, many of them are quitting now because they realize that Google is building the search engines that will power the anti-human rights communist Chinese regime that arrests people for no reason, murders them, and harvests their organs to sell on the organ black market. And the Chinese government murders political dissidents. And Google is creating technology to help the Chinese government accomplish those human rights abuses far more efficiently. Google has become the enabler of global evil and authoritarian horror. And some people are starting to realize that. So defending America is about stopping evil. We have to defeat Google. We have to defeat all those tech giants, frankly. We have to defeat communism. And we have to demonstrate that the concept of this nation, a nation founded on we the people and individual liberties, can still be run by the people and doesn't have to be taken over by a deep state cabal of malicious actors who have sold out the country and who have acted as traitors and betrayers to the very idea of what America means. That's what's behind all this. Maybe that's more of an explanation than what you were looking for, but that's what motivates me. You know, I'm just one person. The idea of America outlives myself and all of us, and it is an idea worth fighting for, because if we succeed, we can bless future generations with the very liberties that we still at least partially enjoy, which is why I can even film this video and distribute this video, why you can even watch it, because we still have enough freedom remaining to be able to communicate about why we have to fight for freedom, why we have to drain the swamp, why we have to arrest the traitors, why we have to empower a president with a temporary time window of martial law if it comes to that. It's a necessary phase to go through to get to a restoration of this constitutional republic. And so I say, God bless America. I say, support our president. I say, defend your nation. I say, drain the swamp, arrest the traitors, and vote against the Democrats at every election, every opportunity. That's how we win. So that's my take on it. And I don't know how much longer we have to keep fighting for freedom here. I don't know how much longer I have, or any of us. All I know is that right now, today, in this moment, that I'm connecting with you through my spirit, my heart, my love for humanity, my love for human freedom, and my decision to no longer tolerate tyranny and authoritarianism and radical left-wing violence and communism and all the things that the left stands for. It is time to defeat them. It's time to restore America. Because I love humanity and I love my country. And if you're with me, I love you being part of it as well. So thank you for who you are. And thank you for watching.